Okay, very good. Welcome if you're just joining us. My name's Sherry Kroll. I'm with the Temecula Valley Historical Society, and tonight we have a wonderful presentation by Steve Williamson from the Temecula Museum on Guenther's Murrieta Hot Springs. I want to introduce Steve. He joined the staff of the Temecula Valley Museum following a 36-year career with the United States Postal Service. It was his interest in historical research and his talent for writing which first attracted Steve to the museum. During the 12 years that Steve has been with the museum, he has become an authority on the life and career of mystery writer Earl Stanley Gardner, who was a resident of Temecula and the creator of the famous fictional character Perry Mason. Williamson is also the author of Pioneers Etched in Stone, a collection of biographies of the individuals whose names are carved onto the face of the 15-ton They Passed This Way granite monument, which is the centerpiece of the Sam Hicks Monument Park, home of the Temecula Valley Museum. Steve Williamson has lived in Temecula for more than 30 years. He's married with 2 adult children who also live in the local area. So that said, Steve, welcome. We're so happy to have you. This topic is very relevant right now, and I'm sure you'll talk about that Murrieta Hot Springs is up for sale again, and we wanted to review all of that history here. If you have a question during the presentation you want to put down in the chat, we can come back to that. If you have a comment, and after Steve's presentation, hopefully, Steve, you can spend a few minutes with any questions.
Sure.
Okay, great. All right, go ahead. We've got some music in the background.
Okay, you should be seeing my first slide. Can you see the slide and can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm seeing a lot of nods. Very good. Well, Sherry, thank you very much for that introduction. As Sherry said, I'm part of the staff of the Temecula Valley Museum and also a member of the Temecula Valley Historical Society. I want to thank both Sherry Kroll and Rebecca Farnbach for inviting me to speak with you tonight. I'm going to talk to you about the creation and development of the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort. For the first half of the 20th century, the resort was the economic powerhouse of Murrieta. It was the icon of the valley and by far its largest employer. I'm going to ask you to try and imagine the Murrieta Valley 100 years ago. Because today, there's been so much development in both Temecula and Murrieta that the resort has sort of faded into the background. It's easy to drive by and not even give it a glance. But a century ago, this resort drew people from all over the country to bask in the sun and enjoy its amenities. There was even a song written about the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort. But this is not just a story of the resort. It's also a story of the Guenther family. They not only prospered as a result of the efforts to develop the resort, they were also civic-minded and generous toward the citizens of Murrieta. It's a tribute to the Guenther family that today, after more than 100 years, the resort—
I got it on the phone.
Well, I got a microphone. You can do it at the computer.
I need you.
Okay.
I think go ahead, Steve. Yes.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. It's a tribute to the Guenther family that after more than 100 years, the resort is still there. And it's for sale. As we shall see in a few moments, when the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort is up for sale, there's no telling what might happen. Now, this first slide is not a picture of the Murrieta Hot Springs, but it is a representation of what a mineral hot spring would look like in its natural state. The health benefits of soaking in such a mineral hot spring was recognized by the earliest Native Americans. The Luiseños in this area called the local hot springs Sharukanukna Hakiwuna. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, so my apologies if I butchered that. Dr. Henry Worthington was the first local physician to praise the healing power of the mineral hot springs. While Murrieta had come to the Temecula Valley in 1873, he acquired 15,000 acres of land as part of the dissolution of a partnership with Domingo Pujol in 1876. Murrieta continued to raise sheep in the Temecula Valley until 1884, when he sold 14,000 acres to the Temecula Land and Water Company, who built a railroad depot and surveyed a township which they named Murrieta out of respect for the man who sold them the land. While Murrieta and his family moved to Los Angeles, but he retained 1,000 acres in the Temecula Valley for himself, which included an adobe home he had built on that portion of the land. That adobe collapsed in an earthquake in 1899. If you're curious about where the Murrieta adobe was located, it stood roughly where Felipe's Pizza stands today, near the corner of Winchester and Jefferson Avenues on the banks of the Santa Gertrudis Creek.
We could look at this on the thingy.
The railroad passing through the Temecula Valley beginning in 1881 created a land boom which continued through the mid-1880s. In 1887, someone in Murrieta had the great idea of creating a steam laundry service using the hot water at the springs. Residents of San Diego could drop off their clothes at a counter in the San Diego Opera House. The clothes would be bundled and put on the train bound for Murrieta. The next week, customers could pick up their laundry, cleaned, pressed, and folded. It was also around this time that a hotel and bathhouse was built as a resort, which was managed by C.B. Robinson. That resort was popular with San Diego residents at the time. The railroad was bringing in a lot of attention to the little town of Murrieta. The popularity of the resort attracted the attention of a Pasadena-based real estate investment syndicate who purchased a total of 1,000 acres of land in Murrieta for $81,620. The 294 acres, which included the Hot Springs Hotel and Laundry, was valued at $50,000 alone. Unfortunately, by 1891, the land boom was over and enthusiasm for Murrieta and the hot springs waned. The hotel and bathhouse deteriorated over the next few years. In July of 1902, a German immigrant named Fritz Guenther traveled to Murrieta at the invitation of a livery stable owner from Lake Elsinore named Charlie Hudson. Hudson took Guenther out to the mineral hot springs and showed him the remains of the resort. Guenther was reminded of the European health spas he had seen while growing up in Germany. He was certain he could restore this property and make it a popular resort once again. In October of that year, 1902, he bought the 294 acres of property, which included the hot springs and resort, from its owner. He paid her $10,000 for the property. Remember, that segment of land had been valued at $50,000 just 15 years earlier. So who was this person named Fritz Guenther? Fritz was born in Germany in 1848. As a young man in Germany, Fritz apprenticed as a carpenter. He came to America in 1870 and settled in Chicago, where he set up a cabinet shop. If you know anything about Chicago history, you know that 1871 was the year of the Great Chicago Fire. Sadly, Fritz's cabinet shop was completely destroyed in that fire. Depressed and deflated, Fritz left Chicago and headed for the mining town of Virginia City, Nevada, where he secured work building underground bracing for the silver mines. It was hard work for little pay, and he was not very happy. Fritz left Virginia City and drifted south to Los Angeles, where he opened a new cabinet shop in 1875. He met another German immigrant named Louise Ludemann. The couple were married in 1883. Soon, Fritz was the father of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. In 1885, Fritz was helping his brother with the construction of a basement restaurant when he observed that there was a lot of money changing hands at the local tavern. Fritz decided there and then that the saloon business was a lot more lucrative than the cabinet business. He opened his first saloon at the corner of First and Los Angeles streets. He soon sold that saloon and purchased a saloon in a better location at Winston and Main Street. Eventually, he moved to a final location at 5th and Spring Streets in the heart of the downtown district. By the turn of the century, Fritz's sons, Hugo and Rudy, were teenagers, and Fritz was eager to teach them how to run a business. Fritz built a cigar shop adjacent to his saloon to help his sons learn something about entrepreneurship. The cigar stand was a very popular hangout for Hugo and Rudy's bicyclist friends. The purchase of the Murrieta Hot Springs property in 1902 renewed Fritz's enthusiasm for building and development. He had spent $10,000 on the purchase of the property. Now he needed development capital. Only 2 months after purchasing the property, Fritz offered a man named C. Edgar Smith the opportunity to match Fritz's $10,000 investment in exchange for a 1/2 interest. The two became partners. With $10,000 now at his disposal, Fritz went right to work cleaning up and developing his resort. This mud bathhouse is the first formal structure. Fritz demolished the dilapidated hotel and built a row of tent cabins. They were simple but functional as guest accommodations. Fritz began promoting his resort by inviting customers at his Los Angeles saloon to come out for a mud bath and a relaxing restorative weekend at his mineral hot spring resort. Within a few short months, Fritz appears to have become frustrated with having to seek the approval of his partner to pursue any of his plans for development of the resort. He sold the cigar stand he had built for his two sons and forced them to withdraw all their savings of the money they had earned so that their father could buy out his partner. For many years, Hugo and Rudy joked that they had become reluctant partners with their father. Nevertheless, the brothers, as well as the entire family, jumped into action to make the resort a success. Everyone had a role to play. Mom and Sis did the cooking and cleaning. Hugo drove the transportation wagon between the train station and the resort. Rudy did maintenance and development. By June, the resort was filled to capacity. Overflow guests were put up in the Fountain House Hotel in Murrieta. Fritz used the cash flow from all this business activity to build a substantial structure to house a check-in desk, administrative offices, a kitchen, and dining hall. There was also a basement, which would be put to good use later. Each evening, the family would entertain their guests in the dining hall. They put on musical shows. Fritz played the zither. Rudy played violin. Everyone sang and danced as part of the evening's entertainment. The entertainment only added to the popularity of the resort as a weekend destination. Incidentally, it's difficult not to notice the motif here on the face of the building. Fritz and his family were not Jewish. Nevertheless, this little design element, which he included on the front of the building, made his visitors from the Jewish community in Los Angeles feel more at home because it resembled a Star of David. That was just fine with him. It didn't hurt business any. Things were happening fast during the resort's first year in operation. By the end of the year, Fritz had begun the construction of a row of wood-framed Victorian cottages. This would become known as Cottage Row. You might notice, like my pointer work, you might notice the bathhouse, the original bathhouse in the background here. In the spring of 1904, Fritz applied for a liquor license. On the application, he reported that the resort had a total of 40 guest rooms. By that summer, construction began on the Monterey Hotel. Notice the same six-pointed star on the front facade of that hotel. This is when Fritz really demonstrated his cleverness as a businessman and his determination to retain absolute control over development of the resort. The pace of growth and development of the resort was outpacing his ability to fund construction with cash flow. Rather than apply for a bank loan and take on debt, on August 10th, 1904, Fritz filed the necessary paperwork for incorporation with the state of California. Unlike a sole proprietorship or a partnership, to be recognized as a corporation, state law requires that there be a minimum number of officers and directors of the organization. On the application for incorporation, Fritz listed as officers and directors himself, his two sons, John Guenther of Murrieta and John Mitchell of Los Angeles. This met the minimum state requirement for incorporation. The initial stock offering would be $150,000. Fritz valued his own assets at $80,000. If you do the math, that means the corporation would gain an additional $70,000 in capital needed for needed improvements, while Fritz would retain controlling interest with 53% of the outstanding stock. Fritz's vision of a European-style health spa was becoming a reality. The popularity of the resort continued to soar as its reputation as a quality weekend experience grew. In 1905, we saw more growth. Telephone service was added, as well as a bowling alley, billiard table, and barbershop. In September, Fritz convinced Santa Fe to provide daily passenger service to Murrieta. In October, a new bathhouse was built and the original bathhouse was expanded. In March of 1908, the resort added a first-rate hotel boasting steam heat throughout, modern plumbing, and more. This is the California Hotel. A motorized wagon brought guests from the train station to the resort. This is Hugo proudly standing in front of the motorized wagon. At the top of the hill, a reflection pool with a gazebo was created. Although the water temperature was too hot for swimming, the pool and gazebo made for a picturesque photo setting. It was not uncommon for guests to see cows grazing on the resort grounds. This was an ever-present reminder that the kitchen served farm-fresh products. In 1909, Fritz's eldest son, Hugo, married Rosa Markenwalder. The couple produced two children, a daughter they named Evelyn, and a son they named Frederick, after Hugo's father. Throughout his life, everyone referred to Hugo's son simply as Bud. In 1911, the Los Angeles Angels baseball team held spring training at the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort. Even before the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, Riverside was a dry county. It had ordinance against the sale of alcoholic beverages. Fritz had built a bar in the basement of the administration building. In June of 1911, Fritz Guenther and bartender James Underwood were arrested for violating Riverside County ordinance against the sale of liquor. In 1912, Fritz Guenther contracted Bright's disease. This is a kidney disease. He refused treatment until it was too late. He died on October 27th, 1912, at the age of 63. At the time of his death, Fritz's equity in the resort was valued at $400,000. According to his last will and testament, half of his estate went to his wife, Louise. The other half was to be shared between his children. I put this picture in here to show what the resort looked like about that time, 1912, 1914. In only 10 years, Fritz Guenther had taken a rundown, dilapidated property and turned it into a world-class health spa and resort. And this was only the beginning for Guenther's Murrieta Hot Springs. Fritz's children and grandchildren had learned the business well. Over the next 50 years, they grew the business by keeping their overhead low and using excess profits to expand the resort to bring in even more visitors and more revenue. In this picture, you can see the original bathhouse. You can see the California Hotel here. This is the new bathhouse that was built. This is a corrugated aluminum structure over a swimming pool that was yet to be built in 1912. I'll bring that up in just a moment. You can see the gazebo with the flag up on top of the hill here. So it gives you a good perspective of what the resort looked like around 1912 to 1915. The year following the father's death, Hugo and Rudy built a grand hall in honor of their father. They called it Memorial Hall and included a second floor apartment to serve as a permanent home for their mother. The year after that, they introduced a huge indoor swimming pool, which they dubbed the Great Plunge. It was enclosed in a corrugated aluminum structure. This was in 1914. 10 years later, in 1925, the resort was enjoying such popularity that it warranted the construction of another hotel. The question was, where to put the new hotel? Remember, they already had two hotels, the Monterey and the California Hotel. They needed a new hotel. The decision was made to move the Victorian cottages to a location in front of the Memorial Hall to make room for the new hotel. The cottages had fulfilled their role as guest accommodations. Once moved into their new location, they began being used as employee housing. Everyone began referring to the cottages in their new location as Whiskey Row. Opening in 1926, the new hotel featured furniture and decor with a distinctly Spanish flavor to them. This was in keeping with the enthusiasm for Spanish-style decor at the turn of the last century, made popular by Helen Hunt Jackson's romantic novel Ramona, which in 1926 was gaining in popularity. The new hotel would be known as the Annex Hotel. It was designed to appeal to guests with discriminating tastes. 2 years later, in 1928, a new mineral bathhouse was built. Following year, 1929, the corrugated aluminum structure over the swimming pool was removed, emphasizing the growing number of outdoor resort activities, including sunbathing, tennis, croquet, and horseback riding. In 1932, the pool and gazebo at the top of the hill, which was known as the Big Spring, was covered over with brick pavers and a grand pavilion added with a well over the mineral spring so the guests could use a ladle to take a sip out of the spring with the healthy mineral water. A year later, in 1933, a miniature golf course was added to the resort amenities. As it turned out, this would be the last of the resort improvements undertaken by the Guenther family. The economic and political winds were shifting. There would be challenges ahead, not just for the Guenthers, but for the whole country. The Great Depression caused occupancy to plummet. All construction projects were suspended. The Guenthers survived the next 20 years as they had always done, by keeping their overhead low and by taking advantage of tax relief provided by depreciation on buildings and equipment. In 1939, Louise Guenther, the family matriarch, died. Her children, Hugo, Rudy, and Annie, inherited her portion of the family business. Hugo continued to perform the duties of general manager. His son, Bud, stepped into the role of assistant general manager, working alongside his father. This aerial photograph provides a bird's eye view of the resort as it looked about 1940. The miniature golf course and tennis courts can be seen in the foreground, you see here. The hotel with the white roof in the center of the picture is the California Hotel. The Monterey Hotel and the Annex Hotel behind it. You can also make out the mud bathhouses and the swimming pool. When World War II broke out, the federal government inventoried all the buildings and equipment at the resort in case it had to be used as a military post. Being very civic-minded, Hugo invested in war bonds and was actually given an assignment as a lookout to help guard against enemy attack by the air. This would be a good time for me to talk about the individual members of the Guenther family. Hugo Guenther was extremely civic-minded. He was a lifelong supporter of the Boy Scouts of America. He received many awards throughout his life for support and participation in the Scouts. He was a member of all of the organizations listed here and was a leader in many of them. He was president of the Southern California Resort Owners Association. After Fritz died in 1912, Rudy Guenther became the chief building architect and landscape designer for the resort. He was married. He was the father of 2 daughters. He and his family lived in Beverly Hills. His primary business was in the film and television industry. He maintained a warehouse where he stored furniture and props, which he rented to Hollywood studios for film productions. During the 1950s, the resort enjoyed some of its most profitable years. Visitors no longer traveled to the resort by train. America had become a nation on wheels. The federal government spearheaded the development of the national highway system. At that time, the road which led from the Highway 395 to the resort was called Webster Avenue. Hugo put in a formal request to the County of Riverside to have the name changed to Murrieta Hot Springs Road, so that motorists traveling along 395 from either the north or the south would know exactly where to exit the highway. In 1952, Guenther's Murrieta Hot Springs Resort celebrated its 50th anniversary. Sadly, it was also 1952 that Rudy Guenther lost his battle with cancer and passed away. The Hot Spring Resort was the largest employer in the entire valley, Temecula and Murrieta. Here's a picture of the kitchen staff alone. You can see from their uniforms what roles they played: chefs, waiters, bussers. But this was just the kitchen staff alone. Of course, there was hotel staff, administrative staff, maintenance staff, cleaning staff, landscapers, the list goes on and on. The 1960s brought a lot of challenges to the resort. Employees were beginning to demand better pay and benefits. Government agencies were imposing workplace safety standards. The cost of maintaining buildings and equipment was rising. The jet age was opening up travel alternatives that did not exist before. Air travel was making it possible for travelers to vacation in places like Hawaii or Caribbean. By the end of the decade, the Guenthers had decided that it was time for them to sell the resort. There were 2 competing offers on the table. One was from a group of Japanese investors, and it would involve some financing. The other was an all-cash offer from a San Diego-based developer. The Guenthers chose the cash offer. In 1970, the Guenthers sold the resort for $2 million to Irvin J. Kahn. Kahn was a serious developer. He had a grand vision for development of the resort and its surrounding property. Over the course of the next 2 years, Kahn poured another $45 million into development projects. He built condominiums, graded land to create pads for mobile home sites. He built new tennis courts, a golf course, a sports center, gourmet health kitchen. He added new landscaping all over the property. Sadly, in 1973, only 3 years after purchasing the resort, Irwin Kahn died. Kahn's attorney, Chicago-based Morris Schenker, took charge of the resort and its development. Schenker was reputed to have ties with the Chicago underworld. The next $30 million of resort improvements was funded using union pension funds made available to Schenker through his association with Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa. Schenker eventually filed for bankruptcy protection, owing the IRS $55 million in unpaid taxes. This was the beginning of 20 years of resort history that can only be characterized as colorful. In 1975, Morris Schenker, still in charge of the property, leased the resort to Dr. R.J. Rudd. Rudd claimed that his concoction of lemon juice and mineral water could cure cancer. Cancer patients from all across the country began flocking to the resort for cancer treatment. These fantastic claims attracted the attention of Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes fame. Wallace sent 2 undercover reporters to the cancer treatment center to gather information. 60 Minutes eventually did a segment on the unsubstantiated claims of Dr. Rudd and his cancer clinic. As a result of this expose, Rudd was indicted, convicted, and sent to prison for fraud. For the next 5 years, the property was vacant. In 1982, Morris Schenker died. An organization called Alive Polarity took occupancy of the resort with the help of a second mortgage provided by Pioneer Mortgage Company of San Diego. Alive Polarity created a new age retreat. There were strict rules against any form of tobacco or alcohol. Phones were not allowed. Visitors had to adhere to a strict vegetarian diet. In 1987, after 5 years in business, Alive Polarity defaulted on their loan and the company was evicted. Gary Naiman, an executive of Pioneer Mortgage, negotiated a restructure of the mortgage and stepped in to try to rebuild the original resort business. He modeled his business plan based on Guenther family philosophy, marketing the resort as a family vacation destination. Naiman began selling shares in a company he called Nameco. In 1991, unable to make the payments on his $9 million mortgage, Gary Naiman filed for bankruptcy. In October of 1991, the property was sold for $3.2 million in a foreclosure sale. Investors in Naiman's company felt they had been cheated out of their investment and sued. Gary Naiman joined the growing number of owners of the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort who eventually went to prison for fraud. In 1995, the Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa purchased the property for $7 million. They turned the property into a Bible college and Christian conference center. The resort was once again a respectable institution. Over the course of the next 25 years, the Calvary Church reportedly invested $20 million in renovations and improvements. Most of the complex is closed to the public, open only to students enrolled in the Bible College. Here are a few photographs of the resort as it appears today. The Spanish-style decor, which began in 1928 with the Annex Hotel, is still apparent today with the red tile roofs and the Spanish ceramic tile throughout the resort. The steaming hot mineral water in this picturesque water feature reflects the days when the property was a natural mineral hot spring. As we talked about before, the resort is once again being offered for sale. Perhaps someone will find a way to reopen the resort to the public and make it a viable asset to the community. We can only hope. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll turn the program back over to Sherry Kroll and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was really interesting. And I have a couple of questions we've got in the chat. Before the church took over, if I can get myself back there. Wendy, I'm like lost in the screen.
Who was it that ran the nightclub and the hotel before the church took over?
Oh, this is something I do not know, because the last people to run the resort before the church took over was that Alive Polarity company, and that was a health type of a thing, and it was vacant after that when they I guess Gary Naiman came in after that, didn't he?
Certainly for me, one of my greatest regrets is not going to that when you could go. I would have loved to have gone that pool. And what did it look like in the bathhouse? Because the plunge looks like a pool. What would it
Yes.
have been like to go into that bathhouse? How large was it? Was it a hole in the ground?
No, they had a number of individual sized baths that there was a attendant, when a customer came in and it was filled with muddy water and they slipped in, there was an attendant there that would attend to their needs and everything. They just soaked in this muddy water or mud, caked with mud, but they were individual baths. I don't know how many. It looked like from the size of the building could be anywhere from 10 to 20.
And were you in a private room or that was public?
That I don't know. From pictures I've seen, I can't tell whether they were walled off or if it was, open. But my guess would be they would close. Oh,
They were
yeah.
private rooms, Loretta?
They were in private rooms, yes, and it was mud where the pond is today, that used to be mud, and they would harvest the mud out of the pond and replace the mud in each individual tub. And there was an attendant there with each individual that was taking a mud bath. And the picture that we saw with Calvary Chapel on the front of it, that's where the mineral water was. The other side was the mud bath. And on top of the mud bath was an auditorium that they used to use for exercising and gym. And then on top of that was a sunbathing area that the guests could go up and bathe in the sunbathe in the nude or whatever they chose. So that's my 2 cents there.
Oh, very well. When
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, that makes. I wanted to know, and there's this next question from Dale Wilkins is similar. Was it true there were slot machines and illegal gambling at the resort after the Guenthers relinquished ownership?
No, those were before, back in the 30s and 40s. In fact, when my husband Malcolm, when the sheriff cracked down, he had to, along with his brother, they destroyed all of the slot machines back in the dump. And the dump is where the mobile home park is today. Those were back in the 40s and early 50s.
Do you have any? Thank you, Laura. Do you have anything to add to that, Steve?
No, she knows more about it than I do. She lived it.
Yep. Question is, anything left of the hot water spring at the top of the hill?
Well, that was covered over by a pavilion, and they just had a well that you could dip a ladle into the thing, but the spring itself is covered over by pavers.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to picture, because I've been out to Glen Ivy, which has similar, I picture similar, but it sounds very different than what you're describing in Murrieta Hot Springs. So
I have something to say on that.
yeah.
And I'm going to kind of reference to Loretta. The picture that you showed where the labels were is still there. That pavilion and the covered springs are just off the walking path, which is just north of the Bible College building. Go ahead, Loretta, take it from here.
Go ahead.
Well, and I don't know anything about a gazebo and a hot springs at the very top of the hill at all. I've never been aware of one. But what you showed as a picture of it is actually along the walking path near the Annex Hotel.
Yes, it's kind of between the Annex Hotel and the swimming pool. If you walked out of the swimming pool and just kept going, instead of turning right to go to the mud bath or the mineral water, there was that large pavilion area that was done in brick, and there were little alcoves with salt in those, and there were cups along in these little alcove paper cups. You would take a dipper that had a long handle, dip water, pour it into a cup, and then sprinkle salt on the water, in the water. It gave kind of the flavor of a hard-boiled egg. And a lot of the guests would bring quart and gallon jugs and take that water home. So.
And Loretta, was the clientele mainly people coming to visit, or did locals use the facilities too?
Locals did not use the facilities. locals worked there. I think half of the town of Murrieta worked there. If you didn't have a business or own a ranch, you generally worked at the hot springs,
Wow.
but you usually did not take advantage of the amenities there. Those were for the guest.
And was the reputation as a wholesome, healthy place to be? Or
Absolutely.
was it more like a nightclub?
No, it was a health resort.
Okay.
They came for the food and they came for the baths. In fact,
And the entertainment.
a lot of people would come for the summer, go to the races and still come back to the springs but the food was one of the highlights of the property. And there was delicious food.
One of the things I'd like to mention, can you hear me?
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to mention was, during the 1960s, Palm Springs became the place to be for the Hollywood type. But during the 20s and 30s and 40s, it was Murrieta Hot Springs was popular with all the Hollywood types.
Absolutely.
I
And
want to
thank you for all the things you had to share, Loretta. I'm glad you were here to tell us those stories about the things you know about. That's fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Daryl has something he wants to say.
I don't know if I don't know how to get on there.
You're talking, and we
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Before a Live Polarity, no, after Live Polarity was there was a nightclub called Shakespeare's. And that was kind of a local hangout. Also, my daughter worked there for, I don't know, 6 months or a year, kind of towards the end when they were still doing the mud baths. And the little individual rooms, you actually walked in and there was a square rectangular hole in the ground, concrete, I guess, about the size, a little larger than a bathtub, and it was filled with the mud. And she was an attendant there, and then people would get hosed, the mud would get hosed off of them, and so on. So that I could tell about that.
Great. There's a question, was the loss of interest with San Diego residents and possibly laundry in 1891 the result of the final discontinuation of the California Southern Railroad service to San Diego because of the flooding in that year?
Absolutely. That was disastrous. That flooding out of the track in 1891 cut northern San Diego County off from the county seat. And it is partially responsible for the creation of Riverside County in 1893, because the residents of northern San Diego County were frustrated, and they began connecting with citizens of Riverside who were frustrated with their representation in San Bernardino. They wanted to create their own county. So that cutoff of transportation between San Diego and Murrieta definitely had an impact on the resort, and it just cut off all that traffic.
Thank you. I want to know if there's any other of our participants who have any memories they could share about the hot springs, or Loretta, if you wanted to add anything.
Sherry, Dave Barnett here. I have a couple comments.
Great.
Hi, Dave.
I lived at Murrieta Hot Springs from about 1948 to about 1970. My father worked there for about 40 years. He was a general manager for many years. I retired in 1970. I worked there during my high school and college years. Worked in the swimming pool and then in the dining room. It was a great place to grow up. It's amazing the amount of information they had there. But Steve, I have to say you did a great job of all the history of the Murrieta, of the Guenther family. A lot of things there I didn't realize for sure, but it was really good, a good presentation you made there, Steve. But anyway, just in general, like Loretta said, it was, I'm Malcolm's younger brother, by the way. But like Retta said, it was a great place for a lot of people that worked in the Temecula, Elsinore, and Murrieta Valley, and a lot of people really worked their whole life there, particularly a lot of the waiters in the dining room and that type of thing. And a lot of people lived right there at the facility, so it was home to them too. So anyway, it was a great experience, and I always have fond memories of Murrieta Hot Springs. So I appreciate the presentation.
And this is Dave Barnett, correct?
Malcolm's brother.
Malcolm's brother.
Mhm.
And Dave, did you use the facilities at all, or like Loretta said, pretty much you were a visitor to use them?
Well, I have to admit, I never did take a mineral bath. I never take a mud bath, but that was what a lot of people came there for. But I certainly enjoyed working there. I worked in the swimming pool and as a lifeguard, and worked in the dining room as a busboy and a waiter, and that type of thing. But I enjoyed the miniature golf course and the tennis courts and growing up and all that type of thing. But I never did partake in the mud baths per se, but that was what a lot of people came out there for.
And do you remember any famous folks who you might have seen come out?
You know, nothing really particular. Certainly, as Loretta mentioned, it catered primarily to the Jewish clientele, and there were a lot of important people that came out of Hollywood and LA in those days, because that was kind of the place to come. And once they knew other friends, they invited other people. And I think, I don't know if everybody mentioned, but it used the price for staying there was, I think they call it the California option, where you paid a fixed price for both the motel and your food. So we had bells that rang for lunch and dinner. They had one bell for the dinner group at 12 and at 1, and then for dinner it was at 6 and 7. So it was pretty regimented as far as eating, but again, the food was very good, and I think a lot of people came out there for the good food we had to offer.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You bet.
One of the things I'd like to mention, Dave brought it to mind, is that not only did just about every resident of Murrieta at one time or another work at the resort, but over 70 years, there were multiple generations of family members who worked at the resort. And you pointed that out, as you had said, your father was working there for a while.
Right, and also our grandfather, my grandfather, he also worked there. He was a buyer there. So Ben Barnett, who was there's a lot of Barnetts in the Temecula Valley. His wife was Bessie Isabel Barnett, who is on that rock there in Temecula. So we're proud to say we have a lot of Temecula history there, and the old Adobe Plaza is also a monument there in the area. So we're proud of that.
Also, just about a quarter mile west of the resort is a Monument Park, where you can see a monument to Fritz Guenther. You know, it's still there.
That's true. And Tony Guenther, he may see this someday, but he's very active and keep in touch with people. But he's Tony Guenther's youngest son of Bud Guenther, and or Hugo Guenther's grandson. But he's still active and still lives up in the Orange County area somewhere.
Newport Beach.
Right. Thank you.
When you talk about the generations, Ben Barnett worked there, then Ralph Barnett, his son, worked there. You and Malcolm worked there, and our then Malcolm's son, James, he started working there as a towel boy. So that was like 5 generations.
That's something.
And Loretta, didn't your grandfather work there? Your grandfather?
My grandfather, Roscoe McDaniel, worked there. He worked in the card room and sold decks of cards. The game was called Pangini, and I think there were like 10 or 12 decks of cards to play this game. But yes, he worked there. And when he worked there, that was the reason I was able to go swimming at the swimming pool there. If you had a relative that worked at the hot springs, if you were, say, lived in Murrieta or Temecula, you could go down to Mrs. Randall's, the linen room, get a pass and pay 35 cents, and we could go swimming at the swimming pool, because that was the only swimming pool in the valley at the time. And that is how I met my husband. He was a lifeguard there.
Oh,
Well, this was a very timely time to have this presentation. And I'm glad that we had so many people tuning in and so many great comments following the presentation. So thank you very much for inviting me to
Well,
be
thank you,
here
Steve.
to
You did a
present
wonderful
this.
job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Loretta. Thank you.
You did.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Before we close, I just want to ask Rebecca if she would like to say anything as our programs share.
Yes, in fact, if he's still with us, the person who's presenting next month could give a talk, speak about it. Steve?
Yeah, I'm here. Next month, we'll be hearing about the California desert photography of Susie Keefe Smith and Lula Mae Graves. And this is part of research that I participated in and a few others. And Susie Smith made photo postcards of the desert in the 1915 to 1935 range and managed to photograph quite a bit of it on her own. And so it's quite an interesting story that goes with the book that we did and the like. So it's called Postcards from Mecca. So
Don't miss
that.
it. It's going to be good. I've heard it before. I've seen his presentation, and that's why he was invited.